Good morning and welcome to our Planning Commission meeting this May 1st, 2024. In regards to our administrative agenda, we're going to start today with our Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Mr. Villalobos, so you can provide the TV coverage announcement.
Thank you and good morning to the Commission. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the Lompoc, South Coast, San Ynez Valley, San Maria, and Orchid areas. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and on the county's YouTube channel. Rebroadcast of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live and will be available for download in a day or two. Shall I move on to roll call?
Please.
Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
Commissioner Bradley.
Here.
Commissioner Park.
Here.
Commissioner Reed.
Here.
And Chair Martinez.
Here.
Thank you.
And Mr. Wilson, if we could have our agenda status report.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. In regards to the status of our agenda, we have one item on our standard agenda, which is a continuance of the energy element updates and amendments, and staff's here to present on that item today. I can move the projection report.
Please
if you'd
do.
like. So our next scheduled hearing is next week, May 8th. There's 3 items on that agenda. We have a single-family dwelling in the Goleta area, and then we have the amendment to the specific plan for the Rice Ranch, which relates to the putting lights in the Orchid Community Park. And then we have an outdoor cannabis cultivation project located in the Buellton area. And that hearing will be located in Santa Maria. So next week will be in Santa Maria. Following that, our next hearing is May 29th, which is a continued discussion on the agricultural enterprise ordinance, and that hearing currently is scheduled to be here in Santa Barbara. And then we do need to have a conversation this morning about our June hearings. Subsequent to our excitement to cancel a hearing on June 12th due to the potential budget hearings, we've been advised that the budget hearing will actually not be on June 12th, so that hearing date is available. And so we had actually canceled that, I think it was last week, but there was a project in North County that was slated for that, which is a general plan amendment for the ag industrial overlay for the Arctic Coal Project. So the request of the commission today is to add that hearing back in and have that project be heard on June 12th in Santa Maria. So we'd canceled it, so we need to bring it back if you would like to do that. And then moving down, June 26th is the next hearing on the calendar, and there's 3 items there. Appeal of a cannabis cultivation in the Carpentry area, and another appeal of the alteration to the YMCA hours, and then another cannabis project in the Lompoc area. That's slated for here in Santa Barbara as well. And then looking into July, July 3rd, nothing's scheduled, and actually we don't have anything on the agenda until July 31st, which we'd continued the appeal of the El Capitan Canyon project there, design standards. So, Mr. Chair, if we could have a discussion on
The June 12th?
that would be great.
Okay, Commissioners, I'm interested in hearing any of your comments regarding that. I know, for one, I would be in favor of coming back on June 12th to hear that Arctic cooling thing in Santa Maria. But Commissioners, Commissioner Briley?
I'm not sure if this actually affects it. I'm fine on June 12th, but I actually am going to be, what is it? I'm actually going to be out of town on one of these hearings on May, hello? Is that better? Well, it is the May 26th, 29th date. I am not going to be here. That's the Ag Enterprise Ordinance, and you guys can all carry on without me. However, if that affects any decision on the June 12th date, is why I bring it up now.
Are you suggesting that the May 29th could be heard on the June 12th?
It's an option if you want me here, but if you're fine without that,
no.
I'm okay. So I just apologize that May 29th wasn't something that I had disclosed earlier, but I won't be here.
Okay. Commissioner Reed?
Oh, I was just going to say that June 12th for Arctic Cool would be fine with me.
Commissioner Parker? You don't have your light on, but.
I do now. So the 12th is fine for Arctic Cold. But also following up on what Commissioner Briley has reported about her ability to come on the 29th, that would mean we would have 2 commissioners absent on that hearing. And if one of them caught a cold, we'd be in trouble. Mr. Tuttle, are you guys ready to go on May 29 for the AO? Would you rather have till the 12th of June, or do you care? What we, I don't know if you're hearing, but we have 2 commissioners will be gone on May 29 when AEO is due to come back with a revised draft. And I know it takes a lot of work to do that. And I don't care, it's 6, 1 1/2 dozen the other. Probably more people in the North County are impacted by this than the South County. And so there might be members of the public that would actually rather have the hearing on it in Santa Maria. But I thought before we discuss that much further, we ought to hear from your office. Do you have any druthers?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Park, I believe it would be, it's an important enough topic, and we've been at it for a while. It would be good to have as full a commission as possible for this day, because we will be coming back with what we hope to be a final package for you to review and consider.
You know what, you guys? I have to apologize, Mr. Chair. I'm totally wrong. It is actually, it's the June 26th date that I'll be gone. I'll be here on May 29th. I am so sorry, you guys. I'm late and confused on top of it.
Would somebody give her a candy bar?
I'm drinking your last Sprite.
That
Sorry.
said, we can do May 29th or June 12th. We're happy to go either way. So if we want to do June 12th so that Commissioner Cooney's available and we can have the full commission in the Santa Maria hearing, we can do that.
Will you benefit from some extra time? Will that help you out at all?
Extra time never hurts anyone, so.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it does. Let me retract, but.
Well, not any career I've ever had, but
Okay. Commissioner Cooney?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly wouldn't have asked the commission to change the date just for my participation, but I see here an opportunity for all of us to be together on the 12th, and if staff doesn't have a problem with it, I'd certainly be willing to move that the meeting of May 29 be canceled, and items from May 29 can be moved to the 12th of June, when I will be available.
Do we need a motion for that, or can we just adopt Commissioner Cooney's statement right now as a motion and then second it?
I'll second it if it was a motion. It sounded like one to me.
Yeah, just to clarify the motion is to cancel the 29th and to set a hearing on the 12th.
Yes.
And move the items from the 29th to the 12th.
So we have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And June 26th, looks to remain. I see that all those things, there's no second district thing on that day, correct? Okay. So so all in agreement, just leave the June 26th as it is?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. And we'll keep it going like that. Thank you. Okay. Anything else, Mr. Wilson? Or,
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, that concludes the projection report.
okay. Public comment. I see nobody in the gallery, so I'm asking if there's anybody on the internet.
No requests.
Okay. So let's move into Planning Commissioner's informational reports. Any commissioners have any informational reports to give? Commissioner Reed?
No, I didn't turn my light off, but
Okay.
nothing to report.
And no? All righty. So then we're going to move into the director's report.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. You caught me before I was absolutely ready. You guys are fast this morning. So we were here last on April 24th. So the key things that have occurred is that we had a board hearing yesterday on the North County sites for the housing element. And they, by and large, supported the Planning Commission's recommendation. They did make so far, have made a change to that recommendation, and Supervisor Nelson decided not to put forward Mariposa Real, the site that is held by People's Self-Help Housing, and instead put forth Element Church, which is on Clark, across from Keyside 10 and 11 in that area. So I think that was the key change that was made. Everything else remained the same. They had, there was some questions about the exception made to the level of service standards and why we were doing that. We explained that there were state laws in effect that don't allow us to deny projects for standards like that. So we don't know where the board will go on those two aspects. There was some discussion too about whether or not the projects that can take advantage of the use by right provision, which is when we rezone a property to meet our RENA, if that property is rezoned at least 20 units per acre, and if it has at least 16 units on it, it can take advantage of use by right, except if there's a subdivision map associated with it, because if there is, that has to follow the regular process. And they have to provide 20% affordable. So the question was whether that 20% affordable should be deed restricted. And we had proposed in our code that it should be deed restricted, and that was something that the Planning Commission had moved forward to the board. There was some discussion about that, and in the end, they did agree that those units, those 20%, should be deed restricted. And that's for 90 years. So that's essentially a summary of where we ended up. We have our next hearing on Friday, and that will be the discussion of the South County sites. Any questions?
Any questions for the director? Commissioner Parker?
Actually,
What? Except Parker for some reason.
No R. E, but no R.
I know. I had a friend named Parker, that's why.
I didn't know who you were referring to. So, says more about my hearing than what you're saying. So I do have a question about the circulation element. You know, it didn't get big play at our hearing, I think rightfully so, given the constrictions. But it sure did in the media. And do you think that there will be further discussion of that at some length on Friday?
I do think there will be more discussion of it. Supervisor Nelson had some questions about whether or not that exception could be isolated to certain areas.
Yeah,
And so it will have more discussion on Friday. I'm confident of that.
got it. Is there any estimate of what will be the length of public comment in terms of time on Friday?
My guess is it would be close to 2 hours,
Yeah.
at least double what we saw in North County.
And is it a special hearing, so that's all that the board will be doing,
That's correct.
and be here in Santa Barbara?
That's correct, in the board chambers, yep.
All right, thanks.
Commissioner Briley.
I had, in flipping through letters, I came across one from the Ag Advisory Commission to the board regarding the housing element, and it made me open my eyes and ask you guys, how did staff go to them? Because their recommendation, the board, was to go to densities of, I mean, it was kind of outrageous, 60 to 70 units an acre in order to preserve ag sites. Did you guys catch that? Is that the number? I mean, it was essentially doubling what we had folded in the HEU, and are they kind of like county riding and hiking committee where they're a little bit out there and they're not going through staff in terms of these comments? It just, to come up with something so much higher than what we had struggled to do was a little surprising for me to read.
So, Commissioner Briley, through the chair, we did, Alex Tuttle went and discussed what we were doing with the housing element. They asked specific questions about it. And we were aware that they were recommending higher densities. And those densities are higher than what we have seen in the county. That's true. But in urban environments like, I mean, I think in the city of Santa Barbara, we have up to 63 units per acre that are allowed. And surprisingly, you would not think those projects were 63 units per acre when you took a look at them. So they're a little bit ahead of where we are in terms of density, but eventually I think most communities are going to have to start thinking about densities of that level because they're going to run out of vacant land. So they're going to either have to redevelop or whatnot. But yeah, I did know about that. Yep.
Okay. Maybe the next cycle they might get more traction on it. I just thought it's hard enough to do what we did, and I
Yeah.
think it's gonna be hard enough for the board to do what we did this round. And so to make that jump up to the kind of density that Santa Barbara's seeing, I can't see that. But for now.
Commissioner Reed.
I attended the meeting yesterday, and I think given the number of properties to be considered, the volume of information, I think staff was very skillful in organizing that material, presenting it, and managing the meeting, including recording the positions of the various supervisors on each property. So I thought it was a model of efficiency and worked out very well. So best of luck to you for Friday's meeting.
Thank you very much.
I have a quick question just for clarification. And this housing element, this is something that has been dictated to us by the state.
Correct.
Okay, I'm saying that for the public because I got a lot of voices in my ear about how it's this body, this planning commission, which is taking it to the county, and it's the county making these moves, but it's really a dictate by the state of which we have to implement within.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the other issue that, and I know this came out in previous meetings, but the parking element, I know we were talking about that it was antiquated, at least for some people, it was antiquated in regards to the parking strategies of what, 1.3 per unit, I think is what his ratio was. Have we taken any steps to start looking at that again?
At parking requirements?
Parking requirements, yes.
Parking requirements. So there are also provisions in the state law under different programs that have specific parking requirements, and that is an objective standard that can be modified through a concession if you're using state density bonus. So the county overhauled their parking requirements, I think, maybe 10 years ago, 7 years ago, something. Before I came back, it was probably 10 years ago. And we aren't currently scheduled to be looking at that, but when we are updating our multifamily housing and our commercial zones, we probably will have to look at that as a tangential item to make sure that we're not over parking and we're not under parking.
Yes, because that's what I've been hearing from the public. I mean, their big concerns is the volume of these residential units mixed with the elements of the parking where there's not enough parking spaces, and they're feeling that that's going to affect the surrounding neighborhoods and their quality of life. So,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
I would say that is a common concern that gets expressed by neighbors or with most projects.
Yes.
Yeah.
Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Plowman, I received a letter, I'm sure all the commissioners did, from the Riker Fowl Law Firm with regard to Glen Annie. And it would, if I remember the import of that letter, it would question what action we as a planning commission took with regard to that particular project. And I wonder if, I mean, it's fine with me if we don't discuss it, because it could be lengthy, but I am curious what county council's reaction is in terms of, you know, the board's hearing on Friday. We'll have to deal with that, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, and Brian can speak to it. I'll just make a few remarks. There are some complicating factors, and there are easements and agreements that are going to be probably tested in this environment. But the board will definitely have to grapple with the information that was provided, and I understand that the applicant's going to be providing a response to that. But Mr. Pettit, would you like to add something?
Commissioner Cooney, through the chair, I'll just confirm we're well aware of the issue and looking into it, and the board will be properly advised.
I'll certainly draw my attention on Friday. Thank you.
And thank you for that lawyerly response. Commissioner Park?
I was a little confused by your answer to Commissioner Briley's question, because I was a little confused about the question. Were we talking about the AAC is
Yeah. Advisory
recommending
committee.
doubling the density? But that's not what the board was talking about doing.
No,
All right.
no. No, I think Commissioner Briley was just bringing up that she acknowledged their letter and the comments in their letter, and maybe was a bit surprised by them. Yeah. But the board did not take that up.
Right. And by the way, on that item that you brought up, Commissioner Cooney, Mr. Lyon, who was the attorney for Glen Annie, was prepared at our hearing to expound at length upon that subject, but it had been brought up without anything in writing by one of the adjoining property owners and brought up at the very last minute. And I did not encourage that. I didn't feel it was appropriate for us to sit as judges on something raised just the last minute. And so that'll be something the board can work out with Mr. Pettit's help. Thank you.
Then the other items, just for your information, is that the Community Services Department is going to be taking forward the Climate Action Plan, and we will be participating in that hearing, and that is on June 4th. And then we have an appeal of the Moriarty CUP for cannabis, and that's also on the 4th of June. And that, I don't think I have anything else to report. Did I, oh, you reported that we got the APA award for the Balancing Act for Central Coast. Yeah.
Chairman Martinez wasn't here, so maybe give yourself another credit.
Yeah, the department and our LRP staff won an award for the Balancing Act tool that's being used as part of the housing element from the Central Coast American Planning Association chapter.
All right. Well, congratulations. Good news there.
Yep.
And Commissioner Reed?
Yes, since we've opened the door to lawyerly discussions, I have a question for Mr. Pettit. One of the things we received recently in one of the packets was a letter representing an avocado grower, a neighboring property to Van Wingerden 1, where he asserts that if the Van Wingerden 1 is developed, according to their proposal, it will interfere with the cold air drainage off of his property, thereby increasing the risk of frost damage to his avocado crop. Are you aware of anything in existing law or case law that would support such a challenge?
Commissioner Reed, through the chair, thank you for raising that question. I have not seen that particular letter, but it's something that I will search out and work with P&D on addressing. Thank you.
Yeah. 2 for 2 on lawyerly responses right there.
Well, I'd like to give a lawyerly response, and that is, when we get these letters as public comment on matters we've already decided and sent to the board, you don't need to read them. Okay, the matter's not active in front of us. For me, it's, you know, it's just like looking at People magazine. It's done, it's in front of the board. Let them worry about that. Those are both letters to the board, not really to us. But we got them.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we'll move on to our standard agenda. Mr. Villalobos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of the County of Santa Barbara Planning and Development that the County Planning Commission recommend that the board adopt Comprehensive Plan Amendment Case Number 23 GPA 4, amending Policy 8.3 and Research Action 8.3.1 of the energy element of the County Comprehensive Plan, and adopt a proposed amendment to Chapter 11 Greenhouse Gas Emissions of the Environmental Thresholds and Guidelines Manual to implement greenhouse gas emissions thresholds of significance in compliance with CEQA Guidelines Section 15064.4.
Okay. And staff?
Good morning, Chair Martinez, Commissioners. Give me just a second while we figure out this PowerPoint.
All righty.
Perfect. Your commission previously heard the energy element amendment and greenhouse gas emissions thresholds on March 6th and continued the item to allow additional time to review project materials, so it is returning today. To refresh, the request today is 2 parts. The first part is an amendment to the energy element to update Policy 8.3 and Research Action 8.3.1 so that it's consistent with the upcoming 2030 Climate Action Plan. The second part is an amendment to the Environmental Thresholds and Guidelines Manual that the county has to include new greenhouse gas emission thresholds for analyzing projects that were developed as part of the 2030 CAP. The county currently has a threshold for GHG emissions of 3.8 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per service population, which means employees or residents of a project. The Planning Commission saw this threshold and recommended adoption of it on November 12th, 2020. The board then adopted it on January 26th, 2021, based on the board's goal at the time of reducing GHG emissions 50% from 2007 levels by 2030. This threshold was adopted as an interim threshold, however, to help the county review projects while a final threshold was developed with the 2030 CAP. In April 2022, then the board adopted a new goal of 50% GHG emissions reductions from 2018 levels by 2030, and that, along with updated emissions inventory data, are the main reasons for the change in the threshold with the 2030 CAP. So again, the previous goal was from 2007 levels, and the board updated it to 2018 levels. Here's a comparison of the interim threshold and the proposed thresholds. As mentioned, primary reason was for the lower thresholds are that stricter emissions reduction goal the board adopted and the updated data. We're also including 3 thresholds based on project type rather than the 1 blanket threshold, which allows the county to be more precise with project requirements for emissions reductions. The changes of the energy element are shown here in red strike through and underline. The minor amendment changes reference the change references from the 2015 Energy and Climate Action Plan, or ECAP, to the 2030 CAP, and include the current GHG emissions reduction goal that, once again, the board adopted in 2022. And then going back to GHG thresholds, CEQA requires analysis of GHG emissions for any project that is not exempt from environmental review. CEQA allows and encourages jurisdictions to adopt thresholds because they make the analysis much easier. With a threshold, a project's emissions are estimated either through a study or a program like CaliMod, and then that estimate is compared to the numeric threshold. If it's less than the threshold, it's assumed to be a less than significant impact. And if there are no adopted thresholds, that project has to instead be analyzed in much more depth for its potential contribution towards climate change, and it's reviewed against local and state regulations. As I alluded to, the interim threshold was adopted to help the county analyze projects while the final thresholds were developed. We're also proposing a consistency checklist that I'll discuss more briefly to make the analysis of emissions even simpler than using these thresholds. And on that, the proposed amendment to the thresholds and guideline manual has two parts. The first is that 2030 CAP consistency checklist. Since the CAP qualifies as a GHG emissions reduction plan under CEQA, projects that are consistent with it can use that analysis from the CAP of GHG impacts. And the consistency checklist was created to help this process. It's a list of questions that help the county planner determine if a project is consistent with the CAP. If a project answers yes to the checklist questions, we really don't have to do any more emissions analysis impact. The draft checklist was included in your packet, and it's pretty simple. Some of the questions are, is the project all electric? Does it include electric vehicle charging? And what are the sources of its electricity that it's getting? If a project is not consistent with the CAP, meaning the applicant can't answer yes to the checklist questions, it then has to be reviewed against the quantitative thresholds. The checklist is designed to apply to broadly to projects and to help streamline that review process. For the thresholds, there are 3 steps to use the quantitative thresholds for analysis of a project. The first is to make sure that thresholds apply to a project, so they don't apply if the project is an industrial stationary source, or if it is consistent with the 2030 CAP and can use the checklist. The second step is to estimate project emissions and compare them to the applicable threshold based on the project type. The thresholds, as you saw, are broken down into residential projects, non-residential projects, and mixed-use projects, which means it contains both residential and non-residential aspects. If the project emissions are less than that threshold, the project is assumed to have a less than significant impact, and we don't need to do any more real analysis of it. The third step is to apply mitigation measures if the project impacts exceed that threshold in the comparison. We will work with the estimate to get mitigation measures and then work them into the estimated emissions and repeat that comparison until the project emissions are less than the threshold. The checklist, as mentioned, is really the easiest route in this, but just because a project is not consistent with the checklist, they may answer no to a couple of the questions on it. That doesn't automatically mean that it will have a significant impact. It can have emissions less than the threshold and therefore be less than significant, even if it can't use the checklist. The energy element amendment can be found exempt from CEQA based on section 15061B3 of the state CEQA guidelines. This section applies to projects which have no possibility of a significant effect on the environment. And then the amendment to the environmental thresholds and guidelines manual to include the GHG thresholds is not defined as a project under CEQA, so no environmental review is required for that. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission take the recommended action listed on the staff memorandum, including making the required findings and adopting 2 resolutions making recommendations that the board approve the energy element amendment and adopt the new greenhouse gas emissions thresholds. And that concludes staff's presentation, and we are available to answer any questions that your commission may have. Thank you.
Okay, commissioners, I know I have one question, or are we just trying to develop a checklist for the purposes of development, which makes it obviously easier for both the developer and staff to address these carbon emission elements? Is that what we're here to do? Because that's my first question. And then it's hooked to the second of, are we changing the bar in the carbon and the carbon emissions situation here by lowering the numbers? And if so, why? Because when I read this, the resolution was being changed where it reads, formerly it read, in July 2020, the board affirmed its target to reduce GHG emissions in unincorporated county areas by 50% below 2007 levels by 2030. Now we're going to go to 2018, which I imagine lowers the bar even more. So my question is, why are we doing this? If it's mandated, it's mandated. If it's not, if it's just in our discretion, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Understood. Chair Martinez, to start with your first question on what we're doing, the proposed changes to the thresholds and guidelines manual is both the consistency checklist to make it easier, as well as a new numeric threshold. So that's part of it. What is before you today. The other part is those changes to the energy element, which are pretty simple text changes that just change what the energy element is referencing, with the assumption for when the board may approve or adopt the 2030 cap. So this is preparing the board if that's the action they choose to take. And the other aspect of it is those changes to the guidelines manual. For your second question, it is lowering what those thresholds are from the interim threshold. So the interim is that 3.8, and the new ones are lowering it to the 2.6, 8, 3, and 7 that are shown here. That is based on the goal that the board has adopted. So they had adopted the 2007 levels goal, but then in April 2022, they updated that goal. They adopted a new goal for that 2018 level. So this is what the board has at their hearing adopted as their goal for county reductions. So this is based off of their decision to do that. These numbers were calculated and end up lower because of that.
Okay, so our purpose here is really just formulating the resolution to match what the board has decided.
That is correct.
Okay. Mr. Pettit.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify, following on what staff just said, you asked about what the function of the checklist itself is, and I wanted to clarify, for purposes of CEQA, what the checklist does is allows an applicant and staff to establish the process and the record for leveraging the climate action plan upon adoption by the board to streamline environmental review of GHG. So that's the purpose of the checklist.
Okay. Thank you. Those were my questions. Commissioner Reed.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. Okay, first, I find that, the first thing that staff would like us to do would be to approve the findings of approval, which were provided in the February 27th meeting. Okay, now, and it's interesting, I don't believe that was part of what was provided, but I had my old notes and my old materials. So I'd like to look at that attachment A. I'd like to look at item 2.4 on that. And it says that these amendments, et cetera, are to meet state required emission reduction mandates set by Assembly Bill 32, SB 32, and Assembly Bill 1279, as well as the county's goal. So it's most of this activity we're doing and the county has done with respect to this based, as with the housing element we just dealt with, upon state mandates to satisfy those requirements?
Commissioner Reed, through the chair, it is partially based on state mandates and more based on the board goal. The board has taken a more strict goal than what the state is mandating.
Okay.
I don't recall the exact percentage by year that the state mandate is, but it has a similar X% from year levels, but the board's goal of 50% from 2018 levels is a stricter goal. It is a tougher goal to meet. So these numbers are based on that primarily.
So the state was the catalyst, but the board has taken them above and beyond as part of our One County, One Climate initiative. Okay.
Correct.
Next thing I'd like to look at is attachment 1, the resolution First resolution GPA. I'd like, among the list of whereases, I'd like to begin with whereas 6 and then the next 3 talking about the various goals and guidelines we are using. And this is just on behalf of the many members of the public who have expressed puzzlement and consternation over the various levels. You know, originally, the cap was 2007 baseline, 15% reduction in greenhouse gas by 2020. Pretty clear and understandable, although the progress report December 2018 showed that between 2007 and 2016, contrary to reduction, the GHG levels for the county had increased 14%. So shortly thereafter, in the 2030 Climate Action Plan, the goal was set, moving the baseline back to 1990 and extending to 2030, looking for a 50% reduction. And then later on, April 2022, Board of Supervisors moved aiming for carbon neutrality by 2045 and setting a reduction goal from a baseline of back to 2018, ending in 2030, of a reduction of 50%. So can you see why some members of the public feel like, feel puzzlement based at the changing baseline, the changing end line, and the changing goal, kind of like trying to play a football game where the line of scrimmage keeps moving, as do the goalposts and the length of the field? Can you see how that's apparent to the public and where it could be a benefit to provide them with a more solid and understandable explanation? Just a question. Okay. Just respecting this. Next one. I see where, you know, industrial stationary sources like mining, oil extraction, they have a single concrete, well-defined threshold of significance. So if you look through Exhibit 1, the thresholds and guidelines, and you thread your way through to item D1, and then you go another page or two, you find out that that numeric bright line threshold for stationary projects is 1,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year. That's the threshold. Pretty clear and understandable. Then for other sorts of projects, the initial thresholds based on square footage have seemed to be discarded, and they're looking at the per capita thresholds, which are, as I would say, fairly clear and understandable. But I do have some questions about those. You look at residential, very clear, non-residential, schools, manufacturing facilities. Just a question with respect to that. Manufacturing facilities, all the employees count toward their head count, toward the 2.63 metric tons CO2 equivalent per employee. Even though their employees report to work during the day, at night go home to where they live somewhere else. Why doesn't that same rule, why are students at a school who would report to school during the day, then go home to live someplace else at night, why don't they count against the threshold? Why were they kicked out? Why, as a functionally, why are they treated differently than employees of a manufacturing facility?
Commissioner Reed, through the chair. That is a good question. I might turn that over to our consultants from Rincon, who I believe should be online via Zoom. They may be able to answer better as they helped develop these. So I would see if they have maybe a clearer answer than I could give you on why students are counted differently.
Okay. Yeah, because it would appear it gives a bias, favoring manufacturing and not a similar thing to a school. So that's a question. I have a few more.
Yeah, this
Or
is
should we
Ryan
wait for a
Gardner from
response?
Rincon Consultants. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, yes.
Great. Yeah, so we work to provide a few different thresholds, as we've talked about. So there's one for employees and one for residential, and then the mixed use version. there are, hotel stays and school children and a few other like smaller uses that are a little less common that we did not create specific thresholds for. And what we've done in those cases are able to create like a full-time equivalency essentially, and you still apply these thresholds to those uses, to determine significance. So I wouldn't think of it as we're providing preference towards one thing or another. It's just that jobs are much more common of a item to analyze than schools. And we're not able to create specific thresholds for every single type of use. So we're still able to analyze those projects. They just take maybe a little bit more effort on side of staff to come up with a full-time equivalency.
Okay. Another question. We go on a little farther in this. You have the statement, CARB recommends statewide targets of no more than 6 metric ton equivalent per capita by 2030. If we were to reach that level, would it match the goal the board set by 2030? Or would it be different, or has that calculation been made?
Commissioner Reed, through the chair, do you mean if we had a threshold of 6?
Right, okay.
If we had set it at that, assuming that projects went up to that, we would be quite a bit past the goal that the board had set. We would not be meeting that goal.
Okay.
So the numbers here are calculated to be meeting that goal. So assuming projects are at approximately these numbers, if they were higher and projects were at those higher numbers, we would not meet the board's goal.
Okay.
And I can also chime in there. The numbers that were provided in the scoping plan, the 6 metric ton number, that's a statewide number and it includes all land use types. And there's actually litigation already around those numbers, and it was determined that individual jurisdictions cannot use those statewide numbers and that they need to conduct their own individual greenhouse gas analysis and determine thresholds based on their specific land uses. So those numbers are much higher than what we see in individual jurisdictions, which are usually around kind of this 2.5 to 3 metric tons per person range.
Okay, thank you. I think one other question I think may be helpful, since I come from spent 30 years in a data-rich environment where people often presented data and may have tried to influence the perception of their audience with that data, sometimes by using percentages instead of raw numbers. I would, because you can get quite a bit of distortion if you're dealing with very small values, talking about a 50 or 100% increase, where the real increase might be from 1.0 per million to 1.5 per million. But I would think might be refreshing if when we give comparisons like the 2007 level or the 1990 level, if we actually gave the metric, the measurement, to whatever the goal measurement, include the percent if you want as well, but that might help the argument. My final one, I got a couple of questions about this, the survey for consistency you're going to use. Okay. Pretty straightforward. I notice many of these measures correspond with various initiatives county has passed over the last few years, like requiring properties be all electric with no natural gas hookup. Also carbon-free electricity, recommending people retain 3CE as their provider, but also going on to say, or otherwise utilize 100% carbon-free electricity. Some of us would be more comfortable if you left off the 3CE and just recommended they secure a source of 100% carbon-free electricity, an option which is available through PG&E and Southern California Edison are going to be delivering the electrons at any rate, despite if they come, why include basically an intermediary, a wholesaler in that? Then two more, sorry. I find it interesting that in terms of EV charging infrastructure, you recommend it for multifamily dwellings, but not for single-family dwellings. I would think it would be better to do just the opposite, or both. Multifamily, if you have someone with EV in an apartment complex, nice to have at least a few chargers, but if you have a single-family dwelling, I think it would add modest increase to the cost. But if you have electric vehicle, an EV or a plug-in hybrid, and you have a home, then why not ensure that that home has a way of recharging it, rather than you have to go park it at Lowe's or the convenient site somewhere remotely from the house. And on construction, I just added one, even me, to my house. And after buying the recharging device, took $1,000 to get the dedicated 50-amp circuit installed, because I'm in an existing home. If you added just one more 50-amp circuit in a new build home, I think the cost would be quite negligible. One circuit breaker and a few wires. So I would like it better if it included both. And then finally, I appreciate the commitment to off-road equipment and electrified mowers, chippers, whatever. But since most people contract with an outside gardener these days, or many people do, I don't really know how that's enforceable. So that might be a nice to know one. So, and one last one. I notice on the large employers, transportation and demand management, you seem to find employers who can have a 50 to 80% telework participation rate by eligible employees. Well, thinking back to your thresholds that are based on per capita, which I would assume means people actually showing up at the facility, if they encourage employees to work remotely, seems like that would create additional rigor with respect to thresholds when they're building their home-based facility. So that seems to me almost to be conflicting goals. I don't know if that has been considered. So with that, I will conclude my comments. So thank you for entertaining them.
Does staff have any responses, though, to Commissioner Reed's, any of his questions or anything?
Chairman Martinez, certainly I may mostly respond to the last few. Those are the freshest on my mind. Starting with electrical vehicle charging, I would agree that having that for single-family dwellings is good. The reason it's left off is it's not a requirement. It is a requirement for multifamily dwellings as well as commercial from the building code. So that's really why it is listed for those rather than for single-family dwellings, is that is where you have to have it. If you would like to install it in your house, great, but it does not, it isn't a requirement for this.
Okay, thank you. I just think it would be nice to have that at some stage built into the code for single-family dwellings, because you have a lot of people under the mistaken assumption that they can unplug the dryer and plug their charger into that circuit. Not enough amperage, so. Yeah.
This is Ryan from Marin County again. Sorry to interject, but the new building code actually does require EV charging for single family, and that's the reason it's not included here, is that it's already a code requirement. And multifamily does have some code requirements, but the requirements that are listed here are above and beyond that. So providing additional charging in multifamily beyond the code. So single family will always have EV charging in all new construction moving forward.
Good to know. Thank you.
Ashley Watkins with the Community Services Department. Our department is responsible for development of the Climate Action Plan. I just wanted to make a few comments in response to the Commissioner's questions. So I think it's important to note, and you already sort of did point to this, that the majority of the measures that are in the climate action plan are from action that's already been taken by the board related to the housing element, the active transportation plan. So what you can look at the climate action plan is kind of a compendium of existing action taken by the board with also some new measures. And then specifically, I wanted to respond to your question about 3CE. So the reason why that's included in the checklist is because the county is actually a member of 3CE, and so we took action to, official action to join them. The board directed that, and as a member, we have the ability to sit on that board and direct the policy and procedures of that organization. And any sort of profit that 3CE makes, that goes back into programs that are supporting a lot of these measures that are in the climate action plan. So that's really the reason why we're pointing to 3CE, but still suggesting that there's this other option of 100% renewables through adding solar or sticking with a green rate with one of the utilities. But I would note that the green rates that the utilities offer are typically more expensive than what 3CE offers.
Oh, thank you. I actually studied that 3CE and other issues as president of the Taxpayers Association since, for the last 3 or 4 years. So pretty familiar with all of those, but appreciate that. And I did call PG&E and they say I can save money when I recharge my electric vehicle. I can call them. They have a special program if I recharge it off peak. So if I wake up at 1 in the morning and plug it in, I'll get a tiny break in the tier, which I haven't gone for yet. Thank you.
One question I have to follow up, though. I just heard the comment. So at first I thought, and that's what was my original question, is that I thought the measures that we have in here were already dictated by the board. Are we putting new measures in this? Because I thought that's the word I thought I heard.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, we're not proposing any new requirements. The reduction target, the emission reduction target has been adopted by the board, the 50% below 2018 levels. So what we're doing is just aligning the thresholds with that board adopted emissions reduction target.
Okay, that's why I want to make sure, because that's what I thought I first heard. Then I heard new measures. Okay. Commissioner Bradley.
This might be a question for staff or Rincon, but it's kind of building on what Commissioner Reed talked about. And that's the home to work commute is changed after COVID in terms of so many people working at home and offices are still not fully leased out, et cetera. So how has that been recognized? Because I think that's a quasi-permanent thing. And you can talk to different planners across the state that say, oh, we're all going to go back. Google's going to have their business park come back. And then you look at the Goleta occupancy of those business parks, and it's not going back. So my question is, policy-wise or scientifically, where is the industry in terms of recognizing more of the remote work model, which obviously relates to the thresholds?
Commissioner Bradley, through the chair, I would direct that towards our consultants to see if they have a solid answer, or I'm sure they do, but to hear their solid answer on how they developed that and took that into account.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say everything that we've looked at, what we based the thresholds off of, our greenhouse gas inventory and our forecast, do not really reflect the new VMT paradigm that we're seeing. It's been really interesting. Like, this is maybe an aside, but like digging into more real-time data that we use for some other projects, VMT has more shifted than actually gone down. So we're seeing more VMT from like commercial deliveries and things like that, and while less specifically for going to work and employment, as people do work from home. But that shift is not really that well reflected in the forecast. I think where that would come into play is when a new development, so say there's a new business park going in, as part of their CEQA process, they're going to have to do a VMT study, right? And look at how much VMT is going to be generated by that project. And I think it would be up to them to say, okay, we're going to allow work from home 80% of the time or 50% of the time or whatever it is. And that would actually help lower their emissions and allow them to get underneath that threshold more easily. So as we've been talking through this, there's always going to be two options for new development. They can either take the checklist approach, which is really straightforward and they don't need to do any like detailed modeling or math, or they can do their own analysis using CaliMod or with consultants to do this calculation and get below the threshold in whichever way they feel like is the way they'd like to go. And that could be through, you know, a robust VMT reduction strategy, or it could be building electrification or additional renewables. That pathway is a lot more, there's a lot more flexibility, but they do have to do that analysis and demonstrate the kind of that more detailed approach.
So, I mean, I'm glad that you're using the term VMT, and I guess that is related. My question was, I mean, it goes back to Institute of Transportation Engineers. You know, you have a trip generation rate for a home of 10 trips per day, and for, you know, commercial, it's X per square foot. I don't think ITE has gotten it together to actually look at this new world that we're in, where so many people are doing remote work. And so, I mean, for the VMT analysis and for air quality projections, is that your baseline data source, is like an ITE rate? Or in other words, it's not just VMT, it's actually trip generation, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, so trips, when we're talking about greenhouse gases, trips is hard because a trip could be any amount of driving, right? Like your trip could be down the street or it could be across the county and back, and those have very different greenhouse gas emissions. So generally when we're quantifying these reduction amounts and looking at the forecasts and the targets and coming up with these thresholds, we're always talking about VMT. But that is linked to trip generation. And I agree, I don't think that the kind of big trip generation numbers and the VMT numbers associated with it have really started to reflect this new work from home type setup. But traffic engineers can still apply like mitigation measures for reduced trips based on like TDM strategies, and work remote and work from home has always been one of those TDM strategies. So I think what we're going to see is just a change in how we're applying those mitigation measures to try to more accurately reflect what these companies are actually doing.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bradley, through the chair, I might just add one more thing onto that, which is the telework question is a part of the checklist. And as we said, the checklist is easy. If they answer yes and show us that they're doing that, the checklist is easy. If they say, we don't want to do this, we're not sure if we can do this, anything like that, it just defaults to using the thresholds, which is still compared to potential GHG analysis and impact on climate change, thresholds are still a very streamlined process. So if they're saying, you know, oh, it's supposed to be a 50 to 80% telework, and they're saying, we're only comfortable hitting 35%, then it's just that they use the threshold instead of using the further streamlined checklist.
Thank you. Thank you. I always personally find all this very interesting because just my personal comment is that I just read an article where the state was saying, okay, all you administrative judges have to come back into the office and do your work and travel, and they sued the state and said, no, carbon emissions. We don't want to go back in. Interesting, and now we're hearing that they don't really have the data. Okay. So I guess you're looking for a motion from us, and I'd like to see if any of the commissioners would entertain in proposing the motion.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, just I know it's a packed house, so we do need to ask for public comment.
Oh, that's right. Public comment?
No requests online.
All right. All right. So having no public comment either in the gallery or on the internet, Do we have a motion from any of the commissioners? Commissioner Park?
I just wanted to, because we're in deliberations now, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to make a comment in deliberations. I had asked at the initial hearing on this matter be delayed so I could read through the materials with an understanding of what they were there for, and I was able to do that. I much appreciated it. And I realized that even though it looked like a massive changes, particularly on the GHG thresholds, it was mainly striking through some interim things that took more language. The internal logic is what I look for, and it was all there. Two big picture things for me. I kind of wish we were looking at industrial stationary and non-stationary sources, because there's sort of a recency bias here that the most recent thing that gets addressed gets the most modern language on it and looks like it gets picked on the most. And I think there will be people in agriculture and development that'll think that they're being pushed a little harder. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but it's just a feeling. Also, just in presentation of these things, I'm glad I read through it and I understood it. I probably prefer if we ideally go back to square one, have a presentation that takes the meaty parts, which here to me was the estimation of likely emissions from different kinds of projects, and went through that a little bit so we see what the logic was. But all that being said, it's where we wind up, and so I'm ready to go, and I'm glad to make the motion. And I would move that we adopt the recommendations that are stated in the latest staff memo, and I'm not going to read through them.
Commissioner Riley?
I'll second that motion, and I had one, it's probably not a cleanup, and I should have brought it up under deliberations, but on your attachment one, the second to last whereas, you're only citing the February 27th staff report. Is there any need to include today's memo as an addendum?
Commissioner Bradley, through the chair, I'm sorry, I don't have that open in front of me, so if I can look at that if
Well,
you give me just one second.
Okay, so it's attachment one of today's packet, page 2, second to the last whereas, where it just discusses, whereas in compliance with government code, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it talks about the findings for approval, attachment A of the county PC staff report dated February 27th, 24.
Understood. So that does not need to be updated. The findings were only included as an attachment to that staff report. I didn't reattach the findings with this memo, so
Okay.
that's still accurate.
Okay, because it was in another one too, but that's because it's on the original packet. That's it. So then my second stands with no other comment.
Any other comments from the, Commissioner Reed?
First, if you could just, what's the name of the consulting firm the county uses? Is that Rincon?
Correct. That is Rincon.
Okay. And who actually creates the language? Who writes these amendments? Who creates that?
Commissioner Reed, through the chair, is that the amendment to the thresholds manual?
Well, either one of the amendments we're about to vote on. When an amendment is created, who does the composition and the writing of that?
Primarily staff. So in this case, I did most of that. We had a guiding document from Rincon that kind of explained their methodology and things like that, so I adapted from that. But all of the red underline and cross out was put in there by me.
Okay. I'm glad somebody does that kind of thing. It would put me to sleep. But yeah, I appreciate it. In light of the fact, this is perhaps an imperfect but necessary action to approve this. One thing I would like to recommend, though, for the climate department, I attended a number of the meetings early on because we signed up from the beginning. And like most other initiatives, you kind of wind up with the same small group of people who participate in almost everything that has to do with environmental issues and things like that. And I think this, since it does influence all of the people in the county, it would benefit from more public education and outreach. I know the website materials, when you know where the website is, you go to it, I think they're excellent. But I think most of the general public is uninformed and, I hate to use the word ignorant, but unaware of the resources and the reasoning behind a lot of these actions that affect all of their lives. So I would recommend, I don't know what department, perhaps the climate people, to really conduct some user-friendly public outreach to really educate the public, since this influences their lives and they're all expected to participate in it. So I think that would be good. But given that, I would be prepared to support the motions.
Commissioner Cooney, I don't know if you had any comment at this point.
Just I'm appreciative that staff has brought this to us so that we can surface some of the issues we've discussed this morning. And I agree that the citizens of our county have a lot to think about, but those that have been able to pay attention to this effort, I think will be better off for it. And as you said, Commissioner Reed, it's really their lives we're talking about. So thank you, Mr. Singer, for a very concise introduction to it and a lot of work behind the scenes.
And then I'll just end with my comments that I appreciate the response to my questions about these new numbers are coming for carbon emissions. I cannot agree even more with Commissioner Reed's comments about moving the goal, but that's not within our purview. It's about the resolution. And I just wanted to make my comment that obviously I will support the motion, but I'm not a big fan of moving the goal, and I'm really concerned about the feasibility of when you move the goal of any effort to address that. But it's just the resolution is we're accepting to it. So I would just call for a vote then.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Bridley,
Aye.
Commissioner Park,
Aye.
Commissioner Reed,
Aye.
Chair Martinez. Motion passes 5-0.
Well, that will conclude today's business, and thank you very much.